Welcome back to Coursera. This is lecture 16. Now that we've completed our discussion about the muscles that act at various joints of the fingers, giving us the power not only to flex and extend them, but also to spread them, now let's turn our conversation about the joints and the muscles that act at various joints of the thumb. So again, when we talk about the thumb, we're talking about a series of bones that are articulating first by utilizing the base of the first metacarpal and its articulation with the trapezium, and this creates a very mobile carpo-metacarpal joint that is much more active than either of the carpo-metacarpal joints at any of the four fingers. So then as we move distally, we will have a metacarpophalangeal joint and only a single interphalangeal joint because the thumb only contains a proximal and a distal phalanx. So again, we're going to see that, like the fingers, there are extrinsic muscles that act on the thumb, whose bellies will be found in either the flexor or extensor forearm, and there will be a series of intrinsic muscles that are found in the confines of the hand that also act at various joints of the thumb. So first off, let's review finger movements, because the thumb is going to have movements available that will flex, extend, ab, and adduct it. But we're going to see in a moment that the planes at which those actions occur are very different than the planes where those actions occur in the fingers. So again, just for comparison, we're showing that your ability to flex and extend your fingers is occurring in the sagittal plane at either the metacarpophalangeal or the interphalangeal joints. So flexion extension is occurring in the same plane at finger joints as flexion and extension that occurred at every other joint in the upper limb: shoulder, elbow, and wrist. And when we finger spread by ab and adducting the digits, that ab and adduction is occurring in the same coronal plane as, for example, we ab and adducted our arm at the shoulder, similar plane. And we know that the ab and adductors of the fingers were interosseous muscles, and muscles that played a key role in specifically flexing the fingers at the MP joints and extending at the IP joints were the lumbricals. So now let's make the comparison of thumb movements. Note that when we flex and extend our thumb, this action is no longer occurring in the sagittal plane. It is no longer occurring in the sagittal plane. It's occurring in the coronal plane, because we flexed our fingers in the sagittal like we do everything else that's flexing and extending, but the thumb flexion and extending is occurring in the coronal plane, basically perpendicular to the same axis where we perform the same action in the fingers. So then what about ab and adduction? Ab and adduction of the thumb is occurring in the sagittal plane instead of the coronal plane. And when we are ab and adducting our thumb, major site where that action is occurring is not so much at the metacarpophalangeal joints as it was in the fingers. It's at the carpo-metacarpal joint formed between the trapezium, basically, and the base of the first metacarpal. So in addition, we have the ability to sweep our thumb over our flexed or extended fingers, an action that's called opposition. Opposition being defined one way as your ability to touch the pad of your thumb to the pads of your other four digits. So we're going to find basically that thumb opposition requires you to abduct it and then flex it by sweeping it across your palm, basically in the coronal plane. So we're going to flex the thumb, abduct it, and also rotate that first metacarpal ever so slightly at the carpo-metacarpal joint to sweep the thumb across the palm of the hand. So then, what about the muscles that act on the thumb? We said that there are both extrinsic and intrinsic ones. So first off, let's start with the major powerful thumb flexors and extensors, remembering that the word for thumb is a pollex. So the two extrinsic muscles, the major extrinsic muscles that extend or flex the thumb are a flexor pollicis longus, that's in the flexor compartment of the forearm, and a pair of thumb extensors called an extensor pollicis longus and an extensor pollicis brevis that are found basically in the extensor part of the forearm. Then, as we said, we need specific ab and adductors for the thumb because the thumb is not going to use interosseous muscles for these tasks. And as we indicated previously, there are two thumb abductors, one extrinsic to the hand, one intrinsic to the hand. We'll see those. And a single thumb adductor that we identified previously as having a function analogous to a palmar interosseous muscle, but being a thumb-specific adductor. Note that the innervation of thumb muscles is going to vary considerably, and we'll talk about these in some detail going forward. So let's look at the players. First off, at the base of the thumb, as we indicated earlier, but now we're showing, is a pad of muscles, prominent pad of muscles called the thenar eminence. And the thenar eminence contains an abductor, a flexor, and a muscle which is acting to oppose the thumb, largely by rotating the first metacarpal to allow the thumb to sweep over and touch the pads or the anterior surfaces of the other four digits. So we also oppose our thumb when we sweep it across our flex fingers, aiding in our power grip. So these three muscles in the thenar eminence are innervated by a very small but important branch of the median nerve called the recurrent branch of the median nerve. Then note that there is a corresponding three muscle group that's in the hypothenar eminence. The muscles have similar names, but now they're known as an abductor digiti minimi, a flexor digiti minimi, and an opponens digiti minimi that play theoretically a similar role as those in the thenar eminence, but are considerably less important in their functional role than their counterparts at the base of the thumb. So then, what about the other extrinsic muscles that are acting on the thumb? Arising from a deep plane in the flexor part of the forearm is the flexor pollicis longus, whose tendon, as we've already indicated, must pass through the carpal tunnel and sweep all the way out to attach to the distal phalanx of the thumb and flex at every joint all along the way. So this is going to be a very powerful thumb flexor, acting certainly at every joint of the thumb that it crosses, flexing at all of those joints. Then, the extensor muscles, the muscles that act on the thumb that are extrinsic, arise in a deep plane in the extensor forearm underneath the more superficial muscles that we identified earlier as acting as wrist extensors or the extensor digitorum. So in a deeper plane here, we show, in this particular picture, the abductors and the thumb extensors. Note that we have an abductor pollicis longus that goes out and attaches to the base of the proximal phalanx and basically acts as an abductor there. And then we also have two extensors. We have the extensor pollicis brevis that attaches to the proximal phalanx, and the extensor pollicis longus that sweeps all the way out to the distal phalanx and certainly extends at every joint along the way. And what the slide also shows is the tendon of the extensor indicis and the location of the extensor digiti minimi that were acting in concert with the extensor digitorum, but only assisting in extension of the knuckle joints of the index and pinky going forward. So here we're showing the location of the extrinsic muscles that act on the thumb, the abductor and the two extensors. Then We can see additionally in this particular view the corresponding very different actions of the thumb. Here we see first over on the left side of this picture the thumb being ab and adducted in the sagittal plane and utilizing two abductors to get the job done, one intrinsic, one extrinsic. The adductor pollicis pulling the thumb back in the anatomic position as well. And then we show the ability to flex the thumb being flexed basically here, and using the other muscles in the thenar eminence also to not only flex it, but weakly abduct it and give us the ability to touch the pad of the thumb to the pads of the other four digits. And also allowing that thumb to sweep across our flexed fingers, aiding in our power grip. Then, note that flexion is performed by a flexor pollicis longus and a flexor pollicis brevis, the brevis being in the thenar eminence, the flexor pollicis longus being an extrinsic muscle found in the flexor forearm. Then the opposition, true opposition, is shown there, as we indicated, where we have the ability to touch the pad of the thumb to the pads of all four other digits. And when we reposition the thumb, we are largely extending it and adducting it, pulling it back to the anatomic position. So we have obviously a number of pollicis muscles acting basically at the specific joints to extend and flex, ab and adduct, and even roll the metacarpal to assist in opposition. But note that opposition is not only performed by the opponent's pollicis, it also requires the use of the other two muscles in the thenar eminence, the abductor and the short flexor. And then, what's controlling thumb movements? So, abduction is controlled by two different nerves. The long abductor was a muscle that was found in the extensor forearm. That's controlled by the deep branch of the radial nerve. But the short abductor that was in the thenar eminence is controlled by that recurrent branch of the median nerve. Extension, entirely controlled somewhat logically by the deep branch of the radial nerve, which is the powerful innervator of virtually all muscles that extend at most joints, but not the interphalangeal joints of the fingers. Flexion, controlled by branches of the median nerve, the recurrent going to the thenar eminence, and an anterior interosseous branch of the median nerve serving that flexor pollicis longus. Then, opposition being controlled by the recurrent branch of the median nerve, which is obviously serving the thenar eminence, and we throw in the deep branch of the ulnar nerve because it's helping to move the pinky over by innervating the hypothenar eminence muscles in a similar fashion. Then reposition, where we are largely extending and adducting the thumb extension controlled by the radial nerve, thumb adduction, that adductor pollicis, being controlled by the deep branch of the ulnar nerve. Now let's consult our digital atlas by looking at the muscles which act to flex the thumb. First off, we see the muscle belly and the tendon of the flexor pollicis longus, the muscle belly of it sitting in a deep position in the flexor forearm. Its yellowish tendon passing through the carpal tunnel where you see it there, and the tendon going all the way out to the distal phalanx where it's flexing every joint that it crosses, carpometacarpal and metacarpophalangeal and the interphalangeal joint of the thumb. And then the intrinsic flexor of the thumb is shown here. This is the flexor pollicis brevis, one of three muscles that's in that thenar eminence, that pad of three muscles that are found at the base of the thumb. Then let's also consult the digital atlas by looking at the extensors of the thumb. And we have an extensor pollicis brevis that comes out and attaches to the proximal phalanx of the thumb, and a flexor pollicis, an extensor pollicis longus that goes out and extends basically at the distal interphalangeal joint. And here again we see the tendon of the abductor pollicis longus that attaches to the base of the metacarpal and basically acts as one of the two abductors of the thumb at that joint. And last, let's look at the muscles that are playing a role in opposition. Recognize that we said that opposition is really a combination of mainly thumb abduction, flexion, and rolling its metacarpal such that it has the ability, as you see on this slide, to touch the pad not only of the fifth finger, but all of the other four. So let's identify the player specifically. There is the abductor pollicis brevis. It's assisted, obviously, in that action by the abductor pollicis longus that we saw previously. And we also show the location of the flexor pollicis brevis, because that's aiding in that action. And what we can't see very well on this slide is the hidden opponens pollicis that lies, in essence, deep to the abductor. But certainly assisting this in this action is the opponens digiti minimi, one of three muscles that makes up the hypothenar eminence, that enhances our ability to sweep our pinky across the palm so that obviously it can better or more easily touch the pad, obviously, of the thumb.